1940. Swing music took the U.S. by storm as World War II continued on. It was also the year that the first Flying Colonel certificate was awarded to a loyal passenger of Chicago and Southern Airlines. This airline merged into Delta in 1953, where the coveted title continued to be awarded until 1998. It was the highest level of recognition you could receive, a mark of prestige and the precursor to the frequent flyer programs as we know them today. Today, I bring you Timothy O'Neill Dunn, who became a flying colonel in 1981. We'll talk about his history with the program and where he stands today. I now bring you Timothy O'Neill Dunn. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining me today. Today, I am pleased to introduce to you someone who is actually part of airline loyalty history. We have a flying colonel with us today. You don't see a lot about flying colonels on the internet. I've done a bunch of Google searches and went to a bunch of forums online, and I really couldn't find much. So I find the subject matter quite fascinating. I'd like to introduce you to Timothy O'Neill Dunn, who is a former flying colonel. And if you don't know what a flying colonel is, and he'll explain much more in detail a little bit later on, it's Delta's loyalty program. It's something that Delta initiated many, many years ago. It's currently called the Medallion Program. And both of us today are high-level members of that Medallion Program. But historically, things were quite different. So we're going to talk about his past, how he got into that program, and the different benefits, and compare it to today. And then we'll move on to talk a little bit more about what's going on in the industry today as a whole. He's an expert in this area, so we're going to talk about his thoughts on that. He's got a tremendous amount of experience in the aviation industry. He's worked for many, many different agencies. He's been part of the startup team of Expedia.com. He's worked with the startup of a new airline, as well as a variety of multifaceted aspects of the aviation industry, traveling throughout the world to share his knowledge. So, Timothy, welcome to my video today. It's great to have you on board.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to be here, and I hope that I can spread a little love in this time of challenge.
It's tough, I'm telling you, absolutely. We're all feeling it, especially those of us who have this great passion for aviation. So go ahead and just tell me a little bit about yourself, what you've done, a little bit about your career, what you're doing now, and what you've...
Sure. So I'm a self-professed av geek. When I found that trains couldn't fly when I was about 7, I realized that my future lay somehow in aviation, and I've been passionate about this. My father was a long-distance traveler for 10 months of the year when I was growing up in the United Kingdom, and on one of my trips to the airport, I picked up this big, thick book called the ABC Guide, which was the World Airlines timetable. And I decided I would try to memorize it. Kind of not necessarily the smartest thing on the planet, but it was fascinating to understand how schedules worked. And I was able to parlay that into a career. So I've spent almost my entire career working in aviation travel and tourism, from airlines to advertising agencies to travel agencies. And as such, I've touched almost every aspect, from operations through to marketing to whatever you like about airlines. But let me go to your question about flying colonel.
Yes.
I think I'm an accidental colonel,
really?
Rather than a programmed, I fit a stereotype. The flying colonel program was started by the old guard over at Delta in probably the 1960s or 70s, I think the 1960s. I was never able to find out exactly when it started. There's another program called the Flying Orchid, and it too is hidden in the mists of time.
Yes, I think that's probably way before you became a flying colonel, correct?
I think
Yes.
You're probably correct. So when in the early 1980s, I was working for an advertising agency, and I saw a problem that Delta had. And I actually wrote a letter to who was then the chap who was CEO of Delta, who was David Garrett. And I said, hey, if you do X, I can't even remember what it was, but it was a personal letter. And lo and behold, about a week later, I get a phone call, and it said, are you in your office today? So we'd like to come and see you. And it was the VP of Delta in Los Angeles, which is where I was working. And they showed up and gave me a plaque and a certificate and said, thank you for this. And the plaque was, engraved to me. I think I've lost the plaque, but I still have somewhere in my history a bag tag with Flying Colonel on it and an ID card. And it was really designed in two ways. One was to record, if you like, for the recognition. And that's, I think, which is what loyalty was previously about. How do you identify people? I actually worked after that for a travel agency in LA called Hoffman Travel, which had the nickname or moniker Travel Agency to the Stars, where we actually turned that into a real business, where we actually gave people, do you want to be in the public eye and go through the throngs of hordes of potential fans?
Right.
Or do you want to go be sneaked in the back stairway and board the aircraft outside of that? We actually did that at LA, Miami, and New York. So I'm more than familiar with the issue of recognition. I think today the nature of loyalty has changed. Most of us are point hounds, and we do whatever we can to get there.
That's totally me.
Yeah, I know, and it's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I think the fact of the matter these days, for me, who flies a lot, and in pre-COVID times, I was flying 250,000 miles a year.
Wow.
So I was actually premium on 4 airlines. So Alaska, Singapore, British Airways, and Delta. But I think my preference did tend to lie with Delta. They flew more of the places that I wanted to fly. But I always felt that Delta gave better recognition to their, let's say, esteemed flyers than the others. And as I said, these days it's more of a mechanics. I've been involved in Delta loyalty, since way back. Actually, was for about 11 or 12 years. I was actually not eligible to be a part of that because I worked for a subsidiary of Delta.
Oh, I see.
I worked for travel agencies, so I was not able to get points. But after that time, I think I've been fairly loyal to Delta. But I call it pragmatic loyalty. But the Flying Colonel program was great because you got that recognition. People looked at your luggage tag and say, hey, you're special, in the same way they do with the metal, diamond tags these days.
Yeah.
I think what's a shame is that it's become so mechanical that there is no ability to provide that thing. And I fly a lot, and I fly often in the back of the bus, not necessarily in the front. And what's weird is, that the flight attendant comes up to you and he's going through a list and he goes, oh, okay. Oh, yeah. We'd like to thank you for your loyalty. And he goes to the next guy and I'm going, yeah, really? Is that what loyalty means to you now?
Right.
And it's not really that personal, but I contrast that with some of the older flight attendants who, that's where you're going to spend most of your time one-on-one with a Delta employee or an airline employee is on board the aircraft. And I have to say that some of the older, more, I would say, customer-focused people will go the extra mile for you. And it doesn't actually matter that you're a colonel or something else. Unfortunately, in recent times, they've removed the designation on your profile. You can dig and find it eventually, but it's not in front of the mind. It's not on the main part of the profile that people see. So they don't know you're a flying colonel.
Right.
I think there's probably less than about 2,000 of us left. I think at the peak there was maybe 5,000 or 6,000. But these days it's, wham bam, thank you, ma'am. Oh, you're a 360. You spend a lot of money, therefore I like you. And you go, yeah, but what about, I've ridden in the back of the bus, I've ridden in the front of the bus, and I try to say that the thing that matters most to me as a traveler, and I think this is kind of the full circle, is what do I think about the service that I get? Yeah. For me, travel has become unpleasant unless you can find ways to make it pleasant. And I find that the reduction of friction that being a diamond or being, a gold member on BA, or even a black if you're lucky, and the million miler designation, I think it's about reducing that friction and making your travel experience less frictionful, if I can use that. So that's kind of the overview.
Yeah, and I felt a lot of those benefits too as a diamond, where I may not get the upgrade, but it's very easy to change flights. It's very easy to talk to customer service. It's easy to make changes basically within minutes. And, I'm always thanked for it. So for me, having only been in this category for a couple of years, it's really exciting. When I get the upgrade, it's like hitting the jackpot, of course,
Yeah, right.
which is a huge, huge benefit for me. I almost always consistently book in the main cabin fare class.
Yep.
I'll automatically upgrade myself to Comfort Plus as a courtesy, and then if I get the first, it's fantastic. So, tell me a little bit about when you started. I believe this is the early '80s. How the aircraft have changed. Has service changed at all? What kind of airplanes were you flying on back then?
Oh, I'll go back to the 1950s because I used to fly a lot with my father. So I've actually flown on a commercial DC-3 and a DC-4 and a DC-6 and a DC-7. So, and all variations of the Connie. I mean, I like to think of myself as I said, I'm an av geek. So I've flown on a lot of different types. I was even looking through some old films that my father had taken, and I found pictures of him boarding a Comet 1, which is, that's a lot of history in that kind of area. I think my passion for aviation and understanding it, I always like to say, slice here and that will flow out, Jet A1.
It's in your blood, yeah.
It's driven by a certain degree of pragmatism. So I like to see that aviation is a very complex business. Commercial airline passenger travel is incredibly complex. A lot of that is driven around safety. So we all know that safety is job one, but what's number two? Number two is operational excellence. So the airlines love to herd you into this: how can I get the least amount of variation so I can have the greatest consistency of operational performance, and thus I can excel. So in fact, it's counterintuitive to an airline to reward, because if they could, they would march us in, goose stepping into the plane. You will sit here and you will sit here. I mean, the flight attendants for a while tried to limit the number of times you could actually stand up on a commercial flight in the United States.
Yeah.
But you've got to be pragmatic about it. So my interest has been, I think it was driven by one single question, which was, how much does it cost to get somebody to the mouth of the jetway? And that's been kind of this all-consuming passion in my head, is to answer that question. You then dive into all the different pieces. What does it cost to distribute a ticket? What does it cost to service a plane? How much does that seat actually cost? Is it true that Emirates and Qatar Airways are actually spending, $250,000 to $500,000 on a first class seat? And the answer is yes. So you've got to think about, how do I pay for that? What's the ROI? And these sort of decisions and business challenges is something that I now find fascinating, because unfortunately I failed as being a pilot. I failed at being a flight attendant because I just wanted to fly. And so now I've focused on something which is, how do you distribute your product? And that's kind of my area of expertise.
Right. Okay. Well, very well said. I appreciate all that information. Let's fast forward a little bit to today's times. Are you flying at all today?
My the last flight I took was, I actually went to France in August and came back and was there for 6 weeks. I own a property in France and stayed there for 6 weeks. And I was pleasantly surprised by how efficient it was, but also very disappointed by the fact that we are still, I think, today dealing with trying to mitigate the effects and impacts of COVID, as opposed to trying to go for prevention. If you think about security, particularly after 9/11, much of the effort has gone into prevention as opposed to mitigation.
Exactly. Yes.
Right? But we're taking completely the opposite way round when it comes to COVID. And this I find disappointing, if not annoying, that we still are not addressing the problem of how do you prevent somebody from getting on a plane who is a spreader. If you look back at, and I've done a lot of research because we're involved in some of these corridors and bubbles, and helping countries and airlines and airports to actually engage in how do you construct a travel bubble between two destinations. So we looked at the research. We understand what the research says. We're involved in universities. We're involved all the way through the process. And you look at, Pierre Gellermeyer, who was one of the prime people in Volvo, who changed a lot of the way that companies deal with each other. And if you like, one of his disciples was Jan Carlson of SAS. And Jan Carlson described this as the 300 points of light, the touch points of, and there are so many touch points that an airline has with its customer. Right. Yet we don't seem to be able to get this particular thing right. And what we have seen is, we know, for example, that the disease spread by aircraft. The biggest spreading point was Heathrow. Worldwide, and it contributed a lot. If you look at how the US, how many points of entry there were into the US for the virus, which is tracked by the genome, you can see that a lot of it came out of the UK to different points. And to this day, we're still permitting people to get on board aircraft who are COVID positive and spreading.
Right.
And this idea of mitigation by saying, oh, look, it's great because you've got this great, HEPA filters on board an aircraft, still undermines the core problem, which is we need to make the air transportation system safe. I've been tested 3 times, but I also have gone through quarantine 4 times.
I believe that Lufthansa is doing some sort of COVID screening in Germany. Have you heard of that?
Yes, there's several players who are doing pre-screening of passengers before flight. Mm-hmm. Part of the challenge with that is there is no reliable instant test. I read this morning that there is a test from the University of Pittsburgh, the Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, where they have developed a device that may cost, they say tens of dollars, attach it to an iPhone, and you can get maybe 3 or 4 uses out of it before you have to throw it away. Mm-hmm. That's great, and it gives you the results within 10 seconds. Yeah. Mm-hmm. My personal goal is to say something under 15 minutes or something under 5 minutes would be great. Yeah. The challenge with that mm-hmm. it is if you look at, we've all been through the security screening, right? You sit there and you watch, you line up, you go through the screening device. Well, if you do that, you're actually in danger of spreading because you're exerting yourself as you do this, which, anytime you speak loudly or you exert yourself heavily, is when the virus actually starts to spread and more forcefully. And you look at those instances. So the problem is, how do I isolate somebody who could be a spreader from the moment they took their test to the moment I can designate them as being safe?
Yeah.
Now, that concept is totally alien to security. But I do know that if you actually go to the government of Hawaii, they have designated a lot of good information about where you can go to get a COVID test. All I can say to people is test and test often. Don't rely upon one single test. Keep on testing and wait 48 hours between tests, right? Because that's how long it takes really for the disease to incubate.
Absolutely. The cruise ship industry, I understand, is also doing some of what you seem to be talking about. I know that in Italy, they've already launched some of the cruises and everyone's going through these scrutinous measures. Do you know if they're actually getting tested at all?
Yes. So the goal from the cruise industry, mm-hmm. which is being trialed now in Europe, so MSC Cruise Lines out of Italy, Costa Cruises, and a bunch of others. Yeah. Are actually doing this, but they have the benefit that they can actually isolate people before they board the aircraft. Board the ship.
They can.
So what they are doing is putting people into a zone of while they're being tested, and they have the time to do that. As you can imagine, loading an aircraft and doing a turnaround in 30 minutes when your testing time is going to be 45 minutes. Oh, wait a minute, there's an issue there.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful that this type of thought process and procedure and protocol will spread to the airlines. I think there's a lot of fear that because so much change behavior is required, that the airlines are not keen to see that type of control put in place
Yeah.
because A, they have to do a lot, the airports have to do a lot, the regulators have to do a lot.
It's a complete change. I actually, for my last flight, made sure that I didn't get there too early. Of course, if you do all this testing, you need to spend more time there. But just the philosophy was, well, there's no one flying right there at the airport now. You'll get through in a breeze. I spent a little bit of time in the Sky Club just to be away from others, then boarded the aircraft. But I'd be all up for that, absolutely. Personally, I've not been COVID tested at all. I actually have been isolating for most of the months. I'm in New York City, and with the situation that we've had here, I basically have not been going out basically and getting everything delivered to my house. Those are definitely some.
I would recommend to everybody for two reasons. Is go get tested, not just for yourself, but for the footprint of testing, and
True.
that's very important. So I would encourage everybody. I mean, basically, testing is free. Yeah, I mean, I just saw my insurance tab.
All over the place, yeah.
It ranged from $150 to $230. I'm going, what? $230 for a COVID test? Are you crazy? That's what one of them charged. So I highly recommend that as much testing takes place as possible because this footprint.
I want to touch a little bit on your, just reading from my notes here, you have this 7-point plan for restoring passenger confidence. Does this also incorporate, is this something you've created? If you want to go over it, explain a little bit. Is this something you created prior to COVID, or is it a new?
No, it's basically, I work with a group of different people and other analysts. One of my friends and colleagues is Henry Hardefeld, and he's also a Delta Diamond. And we came up with this idea of a 7-point plan, which we hope to publish fairly soon. And basically it goes through saying, first of all, let's deal with what is the right regulatory framework. We need to have some degree of commonality. And if you can't have a degree of commonality, then you have to have absolute clarity with regards to the departing airport and the arriving airport. Because remember, almost all travel is round trip. So the Europeans have actually done that. They came up earlier this week with a series of metrics. But the basics of what we're talking about is having essentially the right protocols in place from the government to ensure that a corridor can exist. So the only way we're going to be able to do this is by building up individual corridors where we can point to some successes and say, that works, and then other people can adopt it. Whereas again, as I said, it has to be round trip. What do you do if you have somebody coming from, let's say, Wuhan in China, coming to Auckland, New Zealand? You know, you're going from a level 4 country to a level 1 country. Who's going to be the arbiter of whether that's right or wrong? Yeah. Will New Zealand trust China or the Wuhan authorities to have done that properly? And is that bidirectional? Because the pandemic, the disease and virus itself, doesn't care about geography, doesn't care about politics.
Right.
It only cares about, hey, this is what I feel is important to me and what is my protection that's required. So those are the things that now matter, is how can you ensure that you, starting with the individual, to you, the community, to you, the country, before you can start dealing with cross-border. And again, I think that there has been too little done. So no protocol, no good testing systems, no infrastructure at the airport to isolate people on either side, and no tracing of valid capability on both sides results into, okay, well, we're just going to insist on, I'm sorry, that's it, 14 days quarantine. That's it.
Right.
You go look at the UK. Let's see how successful that's been for you, the UK. So you arrive back and you say, okay, I'm coming in from France to the UK. There's no corridor. You have to go quarantine for 14 days. Okay, where am I going to quarantine? Oh, no, just go home. Well, I don't have a home to. Oh, but then go to a hotel. Here's a list of hotels. Is there any enforcement? Absolutely not.
No, nothing, yeah.
So it's ridiculously stupid.
Yeah, well, those are some very, very insightful ideas. Hopefully, a lot of people will be watching this video so they can actually take
I hope
action.
so. As I said, I think I'm mildly optimistic that we will get there. I
Mhm.
am majorly optimistic that frequent flyers, such as ourselves, know what we're doing.
All right, let's just wrap this up by talking about status with the airlines and your thoughts on status. So my personal thought is to extend, and that's primarily based on what we talked about. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm a great believer in Mr. Newton and some of his laws, and one of those is to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So when you say something like let's extend the status, I'm going to go. That's just disincentivized me for having to do anything about my current status. I actually think that if I do fly and I have that status, yet there's all these other yahoos, if you pardon the expression, who've not done any flying in the past year,
True. Yeah.
and we've actually done some flying and paid money.
Right.
How come we should be treated exactly the same?
Yeah.
So I suspect that there is a certain degree of resentment by frequent flyers for those people who are actually doing the flying versus those people who've just had their status extended. So
Yeah.
that's one position. The other position is kind of an interesting one, which is if I've actually got my status extended and I'm going to fly, why don't I go, and it gives me an ability to take this one moment in time to transfer to another program. Because if you think about loyalty, okay, the difficulty with loyalty is the inbuilt friction that sits within a loyalty program. To move to another, you've got to spend a year going through that. Now,
Oh yeah.
many of the other elite programs had mileage match or status match programs that said, for 3 months, if you do X, we'll give you, and which will make the ability for you to transfer out of one program and go into another. Now we've got basically 18 months to do that in.
Yeah, it's also based upon your geography too. You're I believe in
Yes,
Seattle, so
correct.
you can choose Alaska. So with a lot of the routing that I fly, Delta's the only option in a lot of cases.
Yeah,
So I am trying to say it, and I've always even with a lot of domestic flying, I always take just to get to the next level to 125K a year.
right.
I'll take an international trip. So I did a trip to Italy last year, basically, obviously for fun, but also to get the miles to get on.
Right.
It's just not available to me to do right now as a U.S. citizen. So it's a bit of a struggle on, how am I going to get to that point? But we'll see as time goes by. There's not much we can really
Yeah,
do.
I think
I'm staying
the
safe.
issue for status now is going to be a little challenging because there's been a general devaluation of the value of your points. There's
Yeah.
been a devaluation of the status. I mean, there's now a grade above us called 360.
Yeah.
And I'm somewhat resentful that I didn't get 360 given my historical sense of having been a colonel, then being, platinum, and when diamond came in and I became diamond. And I'm going, so you're not giving me that. I have yet to take a Porsche ride. I want to hasten to add, right? So, but I think then you do turn around and say, well, what are the criteria that I use for traveling somewhere? Now, for many people, and it seems to be the case for you, where you only have a certain limited period, you will actually say, I am going to try and focus my loyalty to one player, and fully understood that. I have so much that I could spread around that I make the decision for status and loyalty is once I reach a certain level, I don't give a damn. I am going to try and spread that based upon the criteria of I have to get there and I have to be there in the most efficient form. So, for example, we have an office in Singapore, and there's a nonstop on SQ. It's still flying a couple of days a week from Seattle to Singapore. It's a 19-hour flight, and it's great. And I will do that versus taking the Delta flight and the connection, because Delta no longer serves Singapore, even pre-COVID, right? So I was pretty ticked off when Delta stopped serving pre-COVID, because even though they say, oh, Korean's great, and Korean is a good airline, but do I get upgrades on Korean? Absolutely not. Never once.
Yeah.
And Korean has been maybe 25% of my Delta traffic in the last
Right, just staying
3 or
within the
4 years.
Sky Team network, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Once you realize that, you go, well, wait a minute. You show us this lovely route map, and you don't change the fact that now that route is no longer served by Delta.
Right.
And the difference between the Delta recognition and the Korean recognition is night and day.
Yeah, I haven't had the opportunity to fly in Korean, but yeah,
I mean, it's a great airline. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It's
No,
great.
I'll admit, I did my trip and I had to fly in KLM because I wanted to stay
Right.
within the network, of course, to get the recognition, which I was totally fine with. So good. Well, I'd like to wrap it up. So I'd really appreciate. Do you have anything else that you'd like to share with us today at all?
Well, there was one question I didn't ask, which
Yeah.
was, what was it like to fly on older planes? And
Oh yes, that's yeah. Mm-hmm.
So as I said, I'm a bit of an av geek, and I love older planes. I remember, I think my first actual memory of flying was on a Qantas Super G Constellation.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, it sticks in my head as one of the most memorable trips, because here was this plane that had huge windows and could fly.
I love that. Yeah.
And I have flown on almost every single type of aircraft that's out there. I actually have a rather large collection of 200 gauge aircraft here. The economics of aviation today has radically changed, and that means that we are now in a world of hurt for the airline industry. And I'm going to do whatever I can to try and restore some of that back, so that we can have that freedom of travel.
Absolutely. Nope, that's important. We need to get back to where we were. I'm just dying to get to a lot of these places throughout the world, watching too many videos of fancy destinations that I just want to go to and can't at this point.
That's right.
Insane times. Well, that was great. Thank you so much for your time, Timothy. Really appreciate that. You offered some great insight. I really would hope that a lot of people do see this video, especially with your fantastic ideas with COVID. If you're watching this video, I really appreciate your time. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel below. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. And hope everybody out there stays safe. Thank you.
Have a good one.